programming, and I'm here with my colleagues, Linda Soto and Charlie Faso. And yay, Charlie. Every time I'm having t-shirts made, where's Charlie? The first thing I have to say is that we are still wearing masks in this room. There are too many people. If you do not have masks, I will give you one. So please put on the mask. It's an hour of your life. It's okay. Is it my favorite thing in the world to do? Absolutely not. But it's a necessary evil, and we have to do it. So do it. What's the next unpleasant thing I have to tell you to do? Okay, everybody please make sure your cell phones are off or on mute or vibrate or whatever other cute thing they do, but don't let them ring, buzz, bleep, whatever yours does. Sounds like it's underwater. My husband sounds like a bottle cap coming off. I can't tell you how annoying that is. I just cannot tell you how annoying that is. Did that, okay. For the exits, we have an exit stage right, stage left, and back of the house. No taking of photographs or film in this program, please, unless you're Larry. This is Larry, and Mary does sound and streaming people. Without them, no sound in this room. And the sound and the okay, that's it. So, for years, the Long Island traditions in the East Meadow Public Library, and I mean like 16 or 17 years, have had, have had a partnership where we do a series of folk or Long Island traditions programs. The director of Long Island Traditions is Nancy Solomon. There are many occasions where I've told you about Nancy. Nancy is a champion, truly a champion of Long Island. She has done numerous things to save our shores, to save the baymen, to clean our bays, to save architecture, and introduce Long Islanders to other Long Islanders who have traditions we're not familiar with, therefore bringing us closer together as a community. She is a champion of Long Island. It's my pride and my pleasure to introduce Nancy Solomon.
Thank you all very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Oh, yes. Okay, good. So, just a little bit of background. As many of you know, I'm a folklorist and an architectural historian, as Jude mentioned. And one of our primary missions at Long Island Traditions is to document, present, and most importantly, to help preserve the traditions that are part of families and communities. Now, many years ago, back in the 90s, I was asked to do some research into the history of Great Neck as part of their efforts to help preserve local architecture. And when I started exploring, the Jewish community, there are a couple of names that kept coming up, and one of them was Rahel Musleah, who is our guest presenter here today. And her story is truly unique because unlike my background, which is the Ashkenazi tradition, Rahel's family comes from the Middle Eastern areas. And so she has devoted her life to help educate people about the traditions of Sephardic Jews in Iraq and Iran and India, which you'll hear about. She has a wonderful program that's called ExploreJewishIndia.com, and I encourage all of you to check out her website. She's an international and national author. She's a journalist who writes for Hadassah magazine. And so there are many talents that she brings to this program as a writer, as an educator, as a performer. And I think that we should get started. So let's thank Rahel Musleah, Let's give her a warm welcome, round of applause. And afterwards, we'll have time for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Jude. Thank you, Larry and Charlie. Thank you all for being here. I'm so thrilled to be here. This is my first in-person program since the pandemic, and just so happy to be here in this space with you. How many of you have been to India? Don't be shy. I see one. How many of you are, like Nancy, from an Ashkenazic or Eastern European background? Anybody here from Middle Eastern or Mizrahi background, Sephardic background? Great. Okay. So most people, when they hear I'm from India, are surprised. I don't look typically Indian. I only wear a sari occasionally. As a costume on Purim, which is coming up, the next holiday, or on my group tours to India, which I was leading twice a year, November and February. And again, we're starting up this November and next February. And I like to say that I am like a piece of baklava, one layer is sweeter than the next. Because I was born in Calcutta, my family is Baghdadi, originally from Baghdad, and I've lived in the United States since I was 6 years old. So I lost my lovely British accent, and now I sound pretty much like most people here, but I do have a very different heritage. So, of course, everybody knows the Taj Mahal, and each time I go to India, I discover another dimension of its richness and beauty and an amazing culture. So there are amazing sunrises and sunsets, architectural gems, and spectacular mirrored palaces. There are all types of transportation, from bicycle rickshaws in Old Delhi to elephants in Rajasthan. There are relaxing backwater boat rides in Cochin, and I never fail to marvel at India's contrasts. There are amazing, colorful markets with every type of fruit and vegetable, and then there are also luxury hotels and sophisticated malls and elegant restaurants. I hope you've all had your lunch, because now you'll be hungry, because this is a thali, which is as you see, a large tray with different kinds of tasting dishes. I know people worry when they go to India that they're going to have spicy food, and we do have spicy food, but guess what? We also have pizza. And when you travel in India, you'll see what looks like a Magen David, like a Star of David, on monuments, on taxis, and even on elephants. But this is not a Jewish elephant. Don't get excited. There's really no such thing as a Jewish elephant. This is actually a good luck sign throughout all of India. In Hinduism, as you see, there's a little Om sign symbol in the middle, so you can tell that this is not really a Jewish Star of David, but it's a general good luck sign. But it's very, very exciting to see it wherever you go in India. So the Om symbol is a symbol of the union of mind, body, and spirit. So I just want to give you a little introduction to India in general before I go into some of the Jewish history and my own background. So I'm just going to play a little video for you, and I hope you enjoy it. So you saw some of India's different religious places in that video, and so we know that India is really a country of diversity, and India's Jewish history is something that people don't know very much about, but it is a rare and benevolent Jewish history. So when we go to India, as we're going to go now, we interact with people who remain across the country and visit different synagogues. So this is actually the Magen David synagogue in Calcutta, where my father was the rabbi. And this is the very famous Paradesi synagogue in Cochin. So here you see the different, if you're not familiar with India, here's a map of India, and you see Mumbai, which I always call Bombay, in the west, and Cochin in the south, Calcutta in the east, and Delhi in the north. Those are the main Jewish communities in India. And I am lucky enough to have a business partner who lives in India. His name is Joshua Shapurkar. He's from the B'nai Israel community. And we lead our trips together. And wherever we go in India, we're treated as if Indians have a motto called "Guest is God." So we're always treated with divine hospitality. And that's how India really welcomed the Jews for 2,000 years. So the book of Esther tells us that King Ahasuerus ruled Mehodu ve'ad Kush, from India to Ethiopia, and that's the first and only mention of India in the Bible. So India's roots really go back to biblical times. But I also love the fact that Hodu, which is the word for India, also means praise God. So I really, really like that double meaning. The Kochini Jews in the south of India trace their roots in India to trade in the time of King Solomon, and also Jews fleeing the Inquisition found refuge in Cochin. The B'nai Israel Jews of Bombay say that their ancestors fled from the land of Israel around the time of the Maccabees. They were escaping the Hellenist persecution, and they settled in the villages along the coast off of the city of Bombay. And the Baghdadi Jews set up thriving communities in Bombay and in Calcutta beginning in the 18th century, but we have an equally ancient history. We trace our heritage to the Babylonian exile dated to 597 and 586 BCE. And the Baghdadi Jews came to India for trade, to escape persecution and plague in Baghdad. There's one other main community, the B'nai Menashe, which are they're Jews who say that they trace their roots, that they're the lost tribe of Menashe, and that they settled in northeast India many thousands of years ago. So India is really a haven for Jews from all over the world. We can say that there has never been any indigenous anti-Semitism in any of our communities. We lived with our neighbors in harmony and freedom. That's really an amazing thing, but that's due to Hinduism's tolerant tradition. Gandhi famously said that Hinduism's multicultural tradition tells everyone to live at peace and to worship God according to their own faith and duty. And it's a good thing that there's no conversion in Hinduism. That also helps. So although I've grown up mostly in the United States, I still have a deep affinity for India and its people. I think the best way to express my feelings about India is to tell you a story about my first trip back to India in 1997 with my parents. So from Calcutta, we took a 5-hour train ride from Calcutta to Madhapur, which was enshrined in our memories as an idyllic hill town famous for its pure water and its clear air. This was a vacation spot for members of the Jewish community from Calcutta. So we went to Madapo partly to search for home. That's more than a symbolic statement. Home is actually the name of the house in Madapo my father stayed in since his boyhood. And in his shirt pocket, he had tucked away a tiny picture of his aunt in front of home's well-kept splendor. I don't know if you can see it because it's not such a great picture, but above the columns, above the doorway, there are four little arches, four little columns, and on each of the little hearts there's one of the letters H-O-M-E. So we went in search of home, and this is what we found. Doesn't exactly look the same after so many years, but I could still pick out the four letters that I was looking for. H-O-M-E. So this man, these are my parents, and this man came out of the house, and he's like, well, what are you looking at? So my father explained to him how far we'd come, and that we were looking for this place called home. The man was just stunned that we had come so far seeking a building. He didn't really realize that home meant something much deeper than its name. So a lot of my feeling for India as home stems from the continued link throughout the generations of the customs and the melodies and the stories that my parents have told me and taught me. So I'd like to just start with one song called El Eliyahu, and I'm just going to show you the words here, but Larry is going to play the music, but you know what, I'm just going to teach you the chorus so you can sing along with me, okay? But when the music comes on, it's going to be a lot faster. It's like if I talk this fast and then you have to keep up with me, so if you want to, you can do that, okay? So the words are El Eliyahu, El Eliyahu, Bizchut Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena. So this is typically a song that we sing at the end of the Sabbath, at the end of Shabbat, and just like in the Ashkenazic tradition, you have Eliyahu Hanavi, right? So don't sing that now. Forget that. Okay, so we're going to learn another Eliyahu song, but Elijah's supposed to be bringing about a time of peace. So whether it's the end of Shabbat or any time, I think that's a wonderful hope to have in our hearts and to sing about. So that's what I hope that you'll keep in your heart when we sing this song. So it goes like this. El Eliyahu, El Eliyahu, El Eliyahu, El Eliyahu, Bizchut Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena. Okay, in the interest of time, we're just going to go on to we're just going to do like a little Indian Jewish karaoke. So this is the accompaniment from my CD, which is on the table over there. I've taken out my voice so I can sing for you live, and here we go. So, Biscuit my CD. So in case you really like the melody, and you want to sing it to words that you might be more familiar with, this is the same melody that we have for Ein Keloheinu on Shabbat morning, so it goes like this. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshinu, Mi Keloheinu, Mi Kadonenu, Mi Kemalkeinu, Mi Kemoshinu. I'll let you think of the rest of it yourself. So I hope you enjoyed that. So at the height of the Jewish community in India, there were probably about 35,000 Jews in all of our community, but even that was just a drop in the population bucket. And now you know that today there are about 1.4 billion people in India, and the 38,000 Jews have dwindled down to 3,800 Jews. And that is amidst a population. Most of the 1.4 billion are Hindus, but there are also 150,000 Muslims. It's the second largest Muslim population in the world after, does anyone know number one? Indonesia. And also Christians, Parsis, Jains, and Sikhs, and a lot of Israelis also. They're just tourists, but why should we care about Indian Jewish history when Jews just make up 0.0004% of India's population? Because Jews in India and their neighbors really are a paradigm for harmonious interfaith living. Indian Jews were pioneers in many fields. You've probably heard of David Sassoon, probably the most well-known Baghdadi Jew. He's known as the Baghdadi. He's a philanthropist and a businessman, and his imprint is all over Bombay and the Far East. And the Sassoons and the other Baghdadis even welcomed Holocaust refugees to Shanghai. There are 4-star generals like Jack Jacob, who changed the course of Southeast Asian history with his daring plan during the partition of Pakistan into Pakistan and Bangladesh. And then there are also Bollywood stars. This is Ruby Myers, known as Sulochana. She was one of the Baghdadi women who were the pioneers of Bollywood cinema. And in addition, she is also my first cousin, twice removed. I'm sure you can see there's a little resemblance there, just a little. And there's also Pramila, who was the first Miss India. Her name was originally Esther Abraham. So you can see that we contributed a lot to Indian society and culture. So why did the Jewish communities leave India when there was no anti-Semitism? Really, the confluence of Indian independence in 1947, and with it the chaos and economic uncertainty around the time of partition, Indian Jews really reevaluated their future in India. And what happened the very next year, in 1948? The State of Israel was born. The Jewish Agency was very active in India, promised that people would have a better life in Israel. And so most of the Jewish communities of Bombay and Cochin, and about half of the Calcutta community, made Aliyah to Israel almost en masse. And during World War II also, there was an influx of British and American servicemen, and some people married them, and also just the wider lens opened on the world. So many Indian Jews also left to settle in England, Australia, the United States, and Canada. Today, of course, there are many diplomatic ties between India and Israel, and there are trade and defense and agricultural ties and programs between the two countries, the two democracies in the region. So let me take you now to Calcutta. This is an old picture of Calcutta, And Calcutta was once the capital of the British Raj, today a city of 15 million, teeming with life, as you see in the famous flower market. It's still a center of culture, gave birth to literary figures like Rabindranath Tagore, who wrote India's national anthem. The first Jew to settle in Calcutta was Shalom Kohen, a Syrian businessman who left his native Aleppo in 1790 at the age of 26, and he settled in Calcutta in 1798. The Calcutta community grew to have 5 synagogues, 2 Jewish schools, a Jewish hospital, other Jewish organizations, and at its height in the 1940s and 50s, there were probably about 5,000 Jews in Calcutta alone. This is the groundbreaking of the Neve Shalom synagogue in Calcutta in the early 1900s, and you can see that the community looked very European with the solar topes and so on. But here in the center is my great-grandfather still wearing his Baghdadi garb, and this is my great-uncle sitting on his lap. I don't know why, he looks like he has a sombrero on, but anyway, I do love this picture. This is my great-grandfather again, and he always wore the Baghdadi robes, and the first language of the Jews of Calcutta was Judeo-Arabic that they brought with them from Baghdad. Judeo-Arabic is like Ladino is a mixture of Spanish and Hebrew, and Yiddish is a mixture of what? German and Hebrew, right? So Judeo-Arabic is a mixture of Arabic and Hebrew, just spoken by the Jewish community. So that was my great-grandfather, and this is me. But I have a dress that belonged to my great-grandmother, and it's a typical Baghdadi dress called a gawan, so I attempted to put it on myself many years ago. I used to bring it to my programs, but it was very delicate, and so I stopped doing that. And this is my mother's family. You can see that they were already dressed in very Western clothes. Can you see? Can you see? So so they're already very westernized. And this is my mother. She's this very sulky-looking little 7-year-old over there. And God bless her, she's going to be 90 years old in a week. And I love this picture. This is not my grandmother or my mother. It's not my aunt or any other female relative. This is actually my father. He was born a sickly child, and so he was dressed as a girl until the age of 4 to fool the evil spirits, because it was thought that if the evil spirits were looking for a little boy and they only found a little girl, they wouldn't know who it was, pass the child by, and we'd all go on our merry way. So he did grow up to be a rabbi, so I guess it didn't harm him in too many ways. But I just always say that it's a good thing that the spirits were just supposed to be evil. Nobody ever said they were smart. Here is the family gathered around the table for a visit from relatives from Israel, actually Palestine probably in those days. And here is my grandfather's Hebrew primer. You can see his handwriting around the sides. They use not the kind of script that we have for Hebrew today, but they use the Rashi script, which is the special script that Rashi commentary on the Bible and on the Talmud is written in. And this is my mother's Hindi primer. So the first generation spoke Judeo-Arabic, and then as the years went by, it gradually gave way to more Hindustani, which is a mixture of Hindi and Urdu spoken in Calcutta, and Bengali, which is the language of the state of Bengal, and of course English. So my first language was English, and And as you heard, I spoke with a lovely British accent that I don't have anymore. This is my great-great-grandfather's ledger. And so you can see the things, he was in the import-export business, so I don't know if you can read what he imported on this particular day. Lozenges, table vinegar, castor oil, and mixed pickles. Well, some days were better than others, and here is his signature at the bottom of the ledger. And this is my great-grandfather's practice handwriting book. And again, I love what he was told to write over and over again, be kind to all, but also, besides letter writing, this is another lost art of handwriting, which is so, so beautiful. So just like to sing for you another song to give you an idea of how Hebrew was pronounced. Because of the Arabic influence, Hebrew was pronounced a little bit differently. There's no v sound in Arabic, so all vets were bets, all vavs were wows, and then there were more guttural sounds. Qaf, gimel, and ayin were more guttural, and sadi was softer. So this is just a little example of a song for Shabbat called Deror Yikra, and it goes like this. Just to give you an example, the accompaniment is something that we used, instruments at engagements and weddings and so on, but on a regular Shabbat and at home or in the synagogue, there was no musical accompaniment, there wasn't even harmony, so it was more of a chant kind of tradition, but very melodious, as I hope you heard. So, the community in India, in Calcutta, mostly dispersed after Indian independence, and my family also went to England, Australia, the United States, and Canada. My father was influenced by a Jewish chaplain stationed in Calcutta during World War II. His name was David Seligson. He was actually the rabbi of Central Synagogue in Manhattan, and he thought that my father would make a very good rabbi. So my father did come to the United States to study at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and here he is, a very dapper young man, in front of JTS, the gates of JTS. He came back to Calcutta to serve the community for 12 years, married my mother, and here is their lovely wedding cake. So one of my favorite, count how many layers. This is my parents and their wedding cake, but I think that really it's the wedding cake and my parents. So by 1964, there were maybe 1,000 Jews left in Calcutta, And so my parents decided that with 3 young daughters, America would be a better place to raise a family. So we came to the United States by ship, and yes, our first glimpse of the United States was, can you see it? The Statue of Liberty. My father's birthday is in July, and we just about landed in the United States. His Hebrew birthday was a little early that year, and so I wrote him a card, and you can see that there's a very accurate depiction of the SS Orsova, which we took from Bombay to London, where we stopped for 5 weeks to visit my mother's parents, my grandparents who had already moved there. And then on the front, there's another very accurate depiction of the SS United States. It just has a different flag on it. And I wrote to darling daddy, many happy returns of the day with all my love and kisses from Rahel. And on the back, I drew a vase with flowers, but I had to label it, these are flowers, because it looks just like another boat. So my father got a job as rabbi of Mikveh Israel, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in Philadelphia. My sisters and I went to the Salman Schechter Day School, where nobody had ever heard of or seen a Jew from India. To me, a Jew from Alabama was more exotic. I stood in front of my class several times singing the Indian national anthem, the Jana Gana Mana, to prove I really was a little Indian girl and not Pocahontas either. I sounded sort of like this. Jana Gana Mana Dinayaka Jayo He Bharata Bhagya Vidhata Punjab Sindh Gujarat Maharashtra Dravid Utkala Banga Vindhya Himachala Jamuna Ganga Uchala Jalari Tiranga. Sing with me if you know the words. Tabashubuna me jage, Tabashubua shishamange, Jaye Tabajaye Gata, Janagana Mangala Dayaka Jayo He Bharata Bhagya Vidhata, Jayo He, Jayo He, Jayo He, Jayo 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 He. So, in case you didn't know what that meant, it was written by Rabindranath Tagore. It's in Bengali, and it's addressed to God and depicts the diversity as well as the unity in the hearts of all Indians. So, my sisters and I also dressed up in Indian costumes sometimes for Purim. My parents packed 10 trunks of things that we brought to the United States, and for some reason they also brought these, we call them Punjabi costumes, but it's really something like what I'm wearing now. It's like a salwar kameez, so it's a tunic and pants, and I know that when I was 6 years or 7 years old, my parents didn't expect me to be doing this, but they saved one of the dresses, and here it is.
Oh, there you go.
Believe it or not, there it is. Well, I have to put it under here, but you get the idea. You know what? It's elastic on the top, so it might still fit me, but I've never tried it because I'm afraid I'll never get out of it.
Is orange significant? Orange.
Orange is a very, very Indian color, yes. But in India, in general, it's a very colorful society, but it's on the flag, yes. So saffron and is a very important color, yes. So Shabbat, of course, is Shabbat, no matter where Jews live. And this is my great-grandfather again, choosing a chicken in the open-air market. He's seeing what's nice and plump, and then it would be taken home for Shabbat. And so my favorite Shabbat and holiday food is called aloo makala. Alu means potato in Hindi, and makala means fried in Arabic. And to me, this is appropriate and symbolic of our food because it was really a mixture of Arabic and Indian influences, also mixed with British influence as the years went by. So more important than that, the potatoes are out of this world. In English, they are called jumping potatoes, because if you didn't pierce them just right with your fork, they jump right off the plate. But I don't know a single person who eats almakalas with a fork. You just wait till they come out of the oil, and just wait like a few seconds so that you don't burn your tongue, and they are crispy on the outside, as I'm sure you can see, and white and fluffy inside. And you could judge how good a cook somebody was by the quality of their almakalas. So most Jewish families had a cook, and an ayah, a nanny, a toby who came to take care of the laundry, a sweeper who cleaned the floors and the bathrooms. This is not because we were so wealthy, but this was the way of life in India, and labor was very, very cheap, and we didn't have modern appliances like ovens and washers and dryers. So when we first came to the United States, my mother, who had relied on our Indian cook, barely knew how to boil an egg, let alone make almakalas. Before we left India, she followed the cook around for a couple of months, and she wrote down everything he did in her steno notebook. She was a stenographer. So the first things that she tried to cook in the United States were mahmousa, which is kind of like scrambled eggs with onions and potatoes. And she tried to make beet kata, which is more of a Baghdadi dish. It's a kind of a sweet and sour stew with dumplings with a semolina coating and ground meat, ground chicken inside. And of course, she tried to make almakalas. Let me just say that we sampled a lot of burned food in those early days. She asked some of the women in the synagogue to guide her with her cooking. They took her shopping for pots and pans, and they taught her how to make good Sephardic foods like chopped liver, noodle kugel, brisket, matzah balls. Many members of Mikveh Israel were also Ashkenazic, even though it is a Sephardic synagogue. So then she turned to relatives, asking how do you make almakalas, how do you make chisamusaks, which are cheese pastries, as you see here. And she was given directions like, well, you take a little flour, you add a little water, you add a little oil, a little salt, no quantities. So she had to experiment on her own, and the happy ending is that my mother turned out to be a wonderful cook. She, until very recently, made delicious vegetable curries, chisamusaks, and great almakalas for Shabbat. So if you would like to try your hand at any of our recipes, you can go on either of my websites. The first one, excuse me, is more recent than the other one, and there are different recipes for almakalas on there. One is more traditional, and then there's a more, there's an adaptation which is easier to do. So, I hope that you know Lecha Dodi. It's a song for Friday night. It's written by the mystics of Tzfat, but it's a universal Shabbat song. So again, I'd just like to teach you the chorus so you can, it's a very easy melody, and then we're going to sing along with the accompaniment. So it goes like this. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Would you like to try that? Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. One more time. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat won't sing the chorus at the end. Okay? But we're ready. Thank you. Okay, so we had two large synagogues in India, Beit El and Magen David, each with soaring ceilings and arched columns and stained glass windows. This is the Beit El synagogue with its golden exterior, and look how magnificent it is inside. I heard that. This is actually the Heichal, we call the Ark the Heichal. It's like a palace for the Sifrei Torah. And you can see the starry night dome above the Heichal. And the platform in front is where weddings and circumcisions would take place. And here I am standing in front of the Heichal in Calcutta. All our synagogues are Orthodox, even though when I go to India, there are maybe 18 Jews left in Calcutta, and so the community has invited me to lead services, and we are able to have egalitarian services in Calcutta. But this is the women's balcony in the Beit El synagogue. This is the Magen David synagogue that my father's family belonged to and where he was the rabbi when he returned to India. The first thing whenever we go to India is that I just stand and I see the steeple poking up from the road across the street before we get there. You might think a steeple is a strange design for a Jewish building, and you'd be right. But it wasn't strange for the Christian architect who had designed it. the first thing that I do when I go to the synagogue is I sit by the plaque with my father's name. He returned to Calcutta to conduct the centenary service of the synagogue in 1985. And when you go into the entrance, above the entrance are the words, Zeh hasha'ar l'Adonai, tzadikim yavo uvo. This is the gateway to God. Righteous people shall enter within. And here is an exquisite picture. I think an American serviceman must have taken it. It's not a recent picture, but you can see that the synagogue is all dressed up for Simchat Torah when the cycle of reading the Torah begins again. And all these parachot, all the ark curtains, were draped from the women's balcony. And this is how the Heichal in the Magen David synagogue looks today. There's Minton tile imported from London and stained glass windows and a chandelier from the Calcutta Opera House, and it's just a breathtaking building. It's really impossible to say how gorgeous it is. The Teiba, as we call the Bima, is in the center of the synagogue facing the Heichal, and that's what you see here in this picture. And the ark is not just a cabinet that opens, it's actually an entire room that held as many as 75 Sifrei Torah in wooden cases covered with silver. And you can see that it's really an amazing sight. On Simchat Torah, all the Sifrei Torah were taken out of the Heichal and displayed on a special stand around the perimeter of the sanctuary to honor them. And you can see I'm not making it up. Have you ever seen so many Sifrei Torah in a synagogue? It's really, really amazing. So this is not just in Magen David, but also in Beit El, had a similar number of Torahs. And this is, the reason is that people dedicated Torahs in memory of relatives, and the Torahs were read in rotation throughout the year. The synagogues have all been restored in the past 5 years. There are 3 synagogues that have been restored in the past 5 years with funds from a couple of Jewish schools that still have Jewish boards of trustees, but no Jewish students. All the students are Muslim. And also the founders of the synagogues left trust funds to help support them through the years. So even though there are such few people, these synagogues still stand as beloved markers of our heritage. And they do have minyanim, prayer quorums when guests or different groups come to India. So to welcome Shabbat, we light a tiria instead of 2 candles. And a tiria is a metal holder, hangs from the ceiling, and glasses are put in and are lit with oil and wicks. 7 glasses for the 7 days of the week, 7th day of Shabbat. A little bit about our Shabbat and holiday customs. On Rosh Hashanah, we have a Seder, a mini Seder. And this is not just for the Calcutta community. All Sephardic communities have this Seder. And we have different fruits and vegetables that symbolize our wishes for the new year. So for instance, of course, apples, the same. We wish for a sweet new year. Pomegranates, what do you think that wish would be for? How many seeds are supposed to be in a pomegranate? Anybody know? 613, yes, and there are actually very close to 613 seeds in a pomegranate. So that would be that we should be as filled with mitzvot as the pomegranate is filled with seeds, and other things, beans and spinach and pumpkin and dates and leeks for wishes that that enmity should be destroyed in the world, and we should be leaders and not followers. So This custom actually dates back 2,000 years to Talmudic times. Seder, of course, means order, so we recite the wishes, the blessings in a specific order, as on this piece of paper that was printed in Calcutta over 100 years ago. But I love this custom so much that I actually wrote a book called Apples and Pomegranates, so that people can introduce and practice this lovely custom at home. We don't really have other home rituals for Rosh Hashanah, and yes, it is here, so you can purchase it. Thank you, Nancy. This is the sukkah on our veranda in Calcutta. We decorated with fruits and vegetables and glass lanterns and the little ornamental lights that all Indians love. And what do you think of when you think of Hanukkah? Latkes, what else? Presents, what else? Like gelt, candles. Well, so far out of those things, we didn't use any of those things in Calcutta. Those are all Ashkenazic traditions. We did, of course, light a Chanukiah, again with oil and wicks, not candles. So this is a typical Bnei Israel Chanukiah in the shape of a Magen David. And this is a typical Baghdadi Chanukiah in a triangular shape. They are hung on the wall, so we can't really put them in the window. But that's how we had them. And then our custom is for each child to get a special colorful shiny paper, and it has all the blessings on it and God's name at the top, and then the name of the child is written in the bottom. So that's hung around the Chanukiah. So now Purim, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks. So what do you think of when you think of Purim? The story of Esther. What else? Groggers. What else? Amitashin, what noisemakers. Yeah. Okay, so out of those things, I can tell you we did read the Megillah in a different melody, of course. We didn't have any groggers. We stamped our feet at the mention of Haman's name. No Amitashin, but we did send around Mishloach Manot, gifts of sweets and so on. And we did dress up. And guess who this little girl is? You. You know, some things don't change. I saw that angelic personality. Okay, enough of that. So a little bit about our Pesach customs. We do eat rice on Pesach, yay! Although many of the movements now say that anybody can eat rice on Pesach. We have a Haggadah with a Judeo-Arabic translation that is chanted after each paragraph in Hebrew, just like we would have an English translation here. We have a date honey called halek, or silan is what it's, you can buy it as silan, but when it's mixed with crushed walnuts, it's called halek for Pesach. This is our charoset. And we have celery leaves, not parsley. We have romaine lettuce, not horseradish. We have lemon juice, not salt water. We have bread, not matzah. No, I'm just kidding. We're not that different. This is the special matzah oven in the courtyard of the Beit El synagogue that was used just once a year to make matzah for the entire community. So this process took a month from the time they bought wheat in the villages to the time it was ground and made into matzah for the community. And so they were sold in these big baskets. We did, of course, have the 4 questions, Manish Tana, but we also have a different order. The third question in the Ashkenazic tradition is our first question, and we all chant it together. It's not the job of the youngest child to sing Manish Tana, so we all sing it together. And so I'm going to just sing for you 2 verses in Hebrew and 2 verses in my Americanized Judeo-Arabic. So when I get from the Hebrew to the Arabic, you raise your hands, okay? So listen carefully. Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot shebechol in auspicious and superstitious ways. This is my great aunt Seema and Uncle Charlie, who were married in the 1930s. You can see they look very typically Western, but we did have some special customs. Arranged marriages were common until the 20th century. There were also love marriages. The engagement took place at the bride's house, accompanied by the sounds of drums and tambourines. The mother-in-law-to-be would place the ring on the bride's finger. If the groom would have placed the ring on her finger, it would be considered an official betrothal, and then if it were broken for some reason, the couple would need a get, an official bill of divorce. The week before the wedding, there was a henna ceremony applied to the couple's fingers, and then the wedding itself, there are a few different things that we do, but the morning after the wedding, the bride's mother sent baklava, again we call baklava, to the couple for breakfast. Every morning for a week, another relative sent baklava. You decide if you call this a sweet beginning or the beginning of mother-in-law troubles. Well, I'm a mother-in-law now, so, and I love my son-in-law, so maybe I shouldn't make that joke anymore. Instead of Siman Tov, Mazel Tov, right? Siman Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. So we don't sing that, this is what we do instead. I should have warned you, right? That's called a ululation, but we just used to call it kilili, because that's how it sounds. A woman at 40 days, at childbirth and 40 days afterwards was considered vulnerable to evil spirits, as was the child, and both were protected with mystical charms and amulets. A baby wasn't even given a name until it lived for 6 days. So we don't really have a lot of time for this. I'm just going to give you like a 30-second tour of Baghdadi sites and people in the other parts of India. This is David Sassoon in the Sassoon Library in Bombay. This is the Magen David Synagogue in Bombay, the first Baghdadi synagogue in Bombay. This is the interior, so you can see that it has, the Baghdadi synagogues do have similarities. Again, the half dome, the teba in the middle, the women's gallery. This is the very elegant Knesset Eliyahu synagogue near the Taj, where we always spend Shabbat in this synagogue. It was just renovated in 2019, and look how gorgeous this elegant Victorian green and gold interior is. And this is their Heichal, their ark. Quickly, we'll go south to Cochin. This is Queenie Halegua, one of the 2 Baghdadi Jews remaining in Cochin, and Sarah Cohen, who died a couple of years ago, who had a sort of Judaica shop where she sold embroidered textiles. So, to end our trip to India, I want to just tell you about my return to India for the first time since I left as a child. I've told you a lot about my group trips, but I went back with my parents in 1997. That was the trip I went to Madapo, and this trip really changed my life. As you heard, I went with my parents, and this was a trip in itself. What I remembered was a reconstruction of old photographs and stories, family stories, buffeted by pictures of squalor and homelessness. I had no idea what I'd really find. We headed to 11 Beaubazar Street, which was home to the Musleah family for 60 years. My great-aunt Rama still lived there, our last relative in Calcutta. And the sign above the door at 11 Beaubazar still said I.S. Musleah, my grandfather's name. And first floor is really the second floor in India. It was almost surreal to walk up the winding staircase and kiss the mezuzah before we entered the house that I had heard so many stories about. There was the south veranda where my great-grandmother peeled vegetables, the north veranda graced by the sukkah. You You can see that the frame of the sukkah stayed up all year long. This was the go-down, the storage pantry that my father sneaked into as a child to savor the secret taste of biscuits and sweets. And this was the window my grandmother looked out in anguish after giving birth to a stillborn child and cried, "God, take me." It was jolting to stand in the places the stories had occurred, as if mythology had sprung to life. The mixture of awe and despair I felt was almost overwhelming. There were many poignant moments. I thought many times about when I visited Magen David, my father's synagogue, how I would stand still against the granite columns and listen to the Torah trope that was sung for generations here. I would let my voice echo the Shema sung in that Torah trope. So I had a lot of expectations. If we have time, I'll sing it for you later, but I know that maybe some of you are watching the clock. So walking together to the 6 a.m. service in the dim morning light, that's when Shabbat services started at 6 a.m., so don't ever complain about 9 or 10 a.m. I was unencumbered by my journalist paraphernalia, and finally I stopped watching my parents and recording every detail for posterity. We sat in our special box, a group of benches, also called a heichal. My father sat in his grandfather's seat, and I sat in my grandfather's seat. I tried to close my eyes and feel my grandfather's presence. He had died before I was born, so I really didn't feel anything. So I got up and stood behind one of the pillars, trying to imagine the benches filled with people. In my mind, I pasted my grandfather's picture onto his seat, a photograph I have of him with a kippah on his head and a siddur in his hand. I pasted my great-grandfather's picture onto his seat, his long beard flowing, and my father's picture as a boy onto his seat in his pre-bar mitzvah Baghdadi outfit. And then, of course, the tears started to roll down my cheeks because all I could do was imagine people in their appropriate spots in this synagogue that was once so vibrant and alive. There was one compensation. We did find a Torah that belonged to my family in the Heichal, and most of the Sifrei Torah were taken out by families that owned them when they left India, and in fact we had taken 3 when we left in 1964. But here was a beautiful Torah given to the synagogue in 1888 by my great-great-great-uncle Yitzchak Rahel Musleah, and it is a beautiful Torah in a light blue case, which is supposed to have been painted this color to match the rare color of his eyes. We were able to take this case out of India with us, and when I go and do scholar residence programs, if I can drive with my Torah, I often take it and read from it. It's a very, very thrilling experience. We also visited the Calcutta Jewish cemetery, and as my father leaned over his parents' graves, I realized with a shock that I was the same age that my grandmother had been when she died in childbirth at the age of 39. Was it an accident that I was kissing her grave for the first time at exactly the same age? When we left, I hugged my father and asked, "Are you okay?" He answered, "Continuity is a great thing." So when we returned home, my children, Shira and Shoshana, continued to dress up as little Indian girls until they got old enough that I couldn't dress them up anymore. And when they became Benot Mitzvah, I did teach them the Calcutta Torah and Haftarah tropes, and they both read from the beautiful blue Torah. And they are now 35 and 29, and here they are at my daughter Shoshana's wedding, and I also have a little granddaughter, Maya Lily, who was just born 9 months ago, So indeed, continuity is a great thing. I won't test you on all my trips back, but in 2006 I did go back with my sister Flora. There was no minyan at all, but I was completely stricken by the beauty of Magen David, as you can see. I stood alone on the teba with my sister, and we sang a song that entered our hearts. The sign with my grandfather's name still hung, but it was harder to read it. We visited Auntie Rama. By then she had dementia, so it was quite a sad visit. And 2 months after we returned home, Auntie Rama died at the age of 98. The house, which was rented for 80 years, reverted to its owner, but the sign with my grandfather's name now hangs in my office right above my desk. I had asked for a friend to bring it back from India. So all these moments lie in my mind and my heart when I return to Calcutta, usually twice a year. Now I am the guide, and we go past the snack sellers and the chai wallas on the street, and we go past the Jewish sites like the Elias Meyer Free School and Talmud Torah. And when I see the steeple of Magen David, as I told you, it's always so thrilling. And then we enter the quiet oasis of peace, and I feel the souls of my family welcome and surround me. We sit in our bench. I open the box where the Sidurim were kept, and I go around and I kiss the 2 Sifrei Torah that are remaining in the Heichal. I inevitably get very emotional, and then I compose myself. And as I always say, we visit a dozen synagogues in all of India, but there is nothing like Magen David. It truly has a soul. So here I am, the community invites me to lead services, as I've told you, and sometimes there are unexpected things that happen. So on our last trip in 2019, we were very grateful to have as one of our participants Rabbi Jonathan Cohen, who is both of Baghdadi and B'nai Israel heritage, and he was brought up in London and was a visiting rabbi at the Bevis Marks, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in London. So he and I both knew some of the same melodies because I grew up in the United States at Mikveh Israel. So we both knew the Spanish and Portuguese melodies. So we were just inspired when we came to take photographs at the synagogue at Magen David before Shabbat. We just started singing, and this is what happened. Just listen, don't look. Now you know how I'd look if I gained a few pounds. And I would walk sideways. But I hope you enjoyed the melody. I'll just end with one last memory. In 2016, my daughter Shoshana came to India with me, and and I was thrilled to see India through her eyes. We did all the touristy things. We visited Hare Krishna temple, we did yoga in Cochin, we visited the monuments in Delhi, we rode elephants in Rajasthan, we visited the Taj Mahal. I'll always treasure this kiss. She dressed up as a little Indian girl again with her turban in Jaipur. She bought a sari. You get the picture. We went to visit the Calcutta Jewish cemetery, where she was very touched to see her great-grandparents' graves. And at the Magen David synagogue, I sat in my grandfather's seat, and she sat in her grandfather's seat in her talit of purple and blue that I had made for her bat mitzvah. And she had learned an aliyah to read from the Torah, and the aliyah that she read describes the way the children of Israel carried their knapsacks filled with matzah on their backs when they left Egypt. And the verse is, Mish'arotam tzirurot b'simlotam al shichmam. And as she stood before the open Torah, the 8th generation of our family in India, the words that she sang resonated beyond their original meaning. Mish'arotam tzirurot b'simlotam al shichmam. We carry our heritage with us. Thank you very much.
I'm sure there are some questions, but I also want to remind everybody that Rahel did bring some of her books and her CDs, so if you're interested in purchasing them, I think you can also purchase them on her website.
Yes, you can.
So are there questions that people have? Okay, yes.
What was the relationship between Baghdadi Jews and the other Jewish communities in India?
Well, in Calcutta, we really had very few non-Baghdadi Jews. We did have some B'nai Israel and a couple of Kochini Jews. The relationship between the Baghdadis and the B'nai Israel in Bombay was not always a very positive one. The Baghdadi Jews did think of themselves as more European, and the B'nai Israel look a little bit more typically Indian. So the communities didn't get along very well. There was some discrimination, but today all those differences have been erased because there are so few of any kind of Jews in India. Yes. Yes. Hi.
When your father, your family moved to the United States, was there any conflict whether it should be the United States or Israel? Did your father consider, well, maybe we should go to the homeland, or should I go to Israel, or should I go to the United States? Was there any thoughts about that?
It's funny because my father, Zichrono Livracha, passed away in 2020, and so I've been going through a lot of his papers and letters and things like that he saved, my mother saved, and so he did consider making Aliyah, just like my aunt and uncle made Aliyah. It wasn't Israel then, it was Palestine in 1945, because there was Habonim, the Zionist movement in India, and there was a pretty strong group of young people who were involved in Habonim, and he originally thought that he might want to follow his brother and sister's example and go to India and go to Israel as well. And so Rabbi Seligson really thought that the community could use a rabbi to guide it. And he saw that my father was a very good leader in the youth group, and so he worked hard to convince him to come to the United States, and that's what happened.
you mentioned the decrease of the Jewish population over the years. Is there any reason why so many Jewish people left? I mean, you said they had a nice life there, treated well, and then you mentioned hardly any people were left.
Yeah, thank you for that question. As I said, when India became independent, people were really not sure what their life was going to be like. They had been under the British for so many years, and there was a lot of chaos and uncertainty around the time of partition. There were different economic changes. There were different educational standards that were going to come in. And people had already been introduced to British and American soldiers, and then of course Israel became a state a year later. So we really in the United States don't understand that if there's no anti-Semitism, that there could be other influences that could cause a community to leave. But those are the reasons that people left. It wasn't because of anti-Semitism, but they just weren't sure that life was going to be different. And life was different, so people left. And there are over 90,000 Jews of Indian origin in Israel today. So that's where most of the community has made its roots, replanted itself.
I have one question.
Yes.
There are so many differences between your traditions and the Ashkenazi tradition. Which have been the most hard to explain to Ashkenazi Jews?
I don't think it's one custom or tradition as opposed to another. It's more a mindset that in the United States, because much of the community is Ashkenazic, that Ashkenazic Judaism has become normative Judaism. And so what we do seems like it's other, but really we could say the same thing, right? It's really a mindset that, Jews are Jews all over the world. I didn't talk about the things that are the same, but of course we have Shabbat, we have all the holidays, but the ways that we celebrate are different based on the way that we, wherever we lived. And honestly, some of the customs of the Sephardic Jews or the Mizrahi Jews are probably closer to the original kind of customs that we had. And they were adapted in Eastern Europe, for instance, romaine lettuce, which is the kind of maror that's described in the Talmud, probably wasn't available, right, in Eastern Europe at the time of Pesach. So horseradish became the maror. So, I think that really it's a matter of understanding that Judaism developed a little bit differently in different parts of the world, and one is not more right than another one.
I only found a difference in the cooking. I had Sephardic friends, and the cooking was different.
I was just
Other
thinking,
than that, they found the religion the same. Hebrew foods, yes.
reminds me of something I just learned, that there are like a whole other range of recipes for matzo balls that are made with olive oil and cilantro and ginger and garlic. Oh my God, they're delicious.
That's true, but guess what? We didn't have matzo balls at all. We just didn't have matzo balls. So that's like a modern fusion of trying to introduce like Sephardic flavors into matzo balls. But we didn't have matzo balls.
But you had matzah.
We had matzah, but for Pesach, we didn't the kind of way that I cook for Pesach now is definitely not the kind of way that they have Pesach food in India. Halek, the date honey, was used as a sweetener for everything. There was no hechsher on items, so they just did without without it. There was no kosher certification. So they sweetened it with whatever was like homemade, and that was the sweetener. And they wet the matzah, and I mean, because we eat rice and legumes on Passover that Ashkenazim traditionally don't, we didn't have so much of a problem of what we were going to eat, you know? So we have pretty much the same kinds of foods during Pesach that we would ordinarily eat.
So, okay, one more question.
Did the Baghdadi and kosher Jews recognize the name Menashe?
B'nai Menashe or B'nai Israel? Which
The
one?
name Menashe, the ones who recently many of the big Aliyah to Israel, were they recognized by the other communities?
So the B'nai Menashe really didn't have anything much to do with the other communities. They only really became B'nai Menashe, like their recent history is like from the 1950s. Somebody had a vision, and the community in Northeast India, which they were all converted by the British to, I think they were Presbyterian, and so they had to convert back to Judaism. So it's not really a question of whether they're recognized. Whatever their roots are, they still have to convert back officially to Judaism. So it's not the Baghdadis or the Kochinis or anybody who is going to say these are Jews or not. They have to officially be converted, and then in order to make Aliyah, the government of Israel, that's where the hang-up was, because there were messengers, shlichim, there were emissaries of an organization called Shavei Israel, which was coming to the B'nai Menashe and convert them, but the Indian government does not like conversion because so many people were converted by missionaries to Christianity. So because there was this conversion issue, there was a problem with getting them to Israel as Jews. But I think that problem has been resolved in the last few years. I hope that answered your question. It's kind of complicated.
So I think we're going to close. I just want to let everybody know that on April 27th, which is a Sunday, we're going to have Kenahora, which is a traditional klezmer group led by Ken Maltz and Pete Sokolow. So we encourage you to check the calendar, check your emails. And let's give Rahel a look. And please come take a look at all the beautiful things that she brought. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to say namaste, which is what we say in India, and that really means I bow to the divine in you. So namaste is just like shalom. We can say when we say hello or goodbye. And if you want to sign up for my newsletter and find out information about my tours or purchase anything, please come and visit me at the table over here. Thank you